Okay guys, we've been talking about, let's say, the required rate of return on stocks, which is dividend yield plus capital gain. We've talked about those formulas, this discounting of an endless string of dividends. And we came up with these two formulas and we saw, let's say, if we do it intuitively, we run to the same answers. Okay, by the way, before I start talking about the new topic, let's say what is of course the weaknesses within these models. Because every guy, let's say, with a little bit of sophistication in math can, let's say, show you that this is true. These things are of course very uncertain. So let's say, yeah, I don't know what the interest rate, for instance, will be after 6 months. So it's quite hard to predict what the interest rate will be, let's say, after 5 years. And we all assume that we know this. This is why we can make these calculations. So let's say, yeah, this is the difficulty. Let's say this, or let's say, because let's say these mathematics are quite, let's say, easy, but let's say they should give you a grasp of how things work. So let's say, for instance, if you can use the dividends to come up with a price. Now I want to do something else, because let's say we've been using the dividends, but you can also say economics always have, let's say, these models that you benchmark things. So things are usually relative within economics. Let's say the phrase they always use in economics is, economists know a lot about prices, but they don't know anything about values. They only are interested in these relative benchmarks perspectives. And let's say now let's take another way to come up to a return for a stock, because we used dividend yield plus capital gain, which is a, let's say, reshuffling of, let's say, our stock price formula, or this formula here. Now we can also say we can come up to a return of a stock in another way, by benchmarking. And the whole idea here is that you would say, okay, what is the benchmark? And the benchmark is the market, or the index. So I want to introduce a new concept which is called beta. Beta is actually an expression of the riskiness of a stock, or the volatility of a stock, related to the market or related to the index. For instance, in our Dutch example, the AEX, the Dutch Amsterdam Exchange. So let's say this index of, let's say, 25 stocks that represent the Dutch economy. How is this stock related to this concerning, let's say, this risk portion? This is what the beta, let's say, holds. So for instance, if the beta of stock I is 1, it means it moves the same as the market. So if the market goes up with 5%, your stock is also going up with 5%. The market, let's say, plummets with 10%, your stock also plummets with 10%. So it's completely in line with the market. If, for instance, beta is, let's say, a half, what happens? You have a quite defensive stock, because if the market goes up with 10%, your stock only goes up with 5%. If the market goes down with 10%, your stock only goes down with 5%. So it's quite defensive. So more in the sense like, this is quite risky. If a beta is larger than 1, for instance, make it 2. If the market goes up with 10%, your stock goes up with 20%. Vice versa, the other way around. If the market goes down with 5%, your stock tumbles with 10%. So more in the sense like, these things are expressed. So it's actually a risk factor of a certain stock I, benchmarked on the market. This is actually nothing but, for instance, for people who are, let's say, somewhat more sophisticated in statistics. This is not just your regression coefficient from linear regression. This is the same beta, because this is how they come up with it. Okay, but let's go on. So the formula would be, the return on a stock is actually the risk-free return. And the risk-free return is, for instance, the return on treasury bills, let's say, usually seen as the return that is provided by short-term government notes. So more in the sense like, especially Western governments, we perceive in the future, let's say in the past, as entities that are incapable of going bankrupt, because they have this monopoly on violence. If they don't have money, they're going to get the money. So more in a sense like, what I'm getting at here is, more in a sense like, the return of a stock should be at least the risk-free rate. For instance, the return that is provided by the government, the most safest entity there is on short-term bills, plus something extra, which is portrayed in this formula. And it tells us, let's say, beta of the market, let's say the risk factor of the market, plus something extra. And this is what we call excess return, the return on the market, minus the return, the risk-free return. So this is the excess return. So if you want to interpret this, that you would say, okay, there is another way to come up with a return for the stock. How? Now, by saying it should be at least the return the governments provide on short-term paper. But it should be more because, let's say, this company is more risky than, let's say, the government. So it is giving some extra because of this risk-return trade-off. So more in a sense like, what happens? It is the risk-free return plus something extra before, let's say, compensating for the extra risk. And the risk is, let's say, embodied in this beta. So this is how it works. So if we take, for instance, a simple example, if beta is 1, now it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see if beta is 1, then you would say, this is 1. Now, what you would say, let's say the brackets are completely away then, right? And what happens? The return on a stock is nothing but the market return. So if you have the same risk as the market, then you give the same return as the market. Otherwise it would be strange, and otherwise there would be possibilities for arbitrage. Another thing is that you would say, okay, if you're more risky, yes, then this part becomes larger. So for instance, if beta is 2, this formula becomes much larger. So for instance, if beta is 2, what will happen? Right? So, if beta is 2, what will happen? What will be your return? Rf plus 2 times. So, what happens? It is, this will be a return. The whole idea here is, if we want to depict this in a picture, then we can say, what is the return on a stock? If we know the beta, it's nothing but return on the stock. Here we portray the betas. Then we would say, not only of, let's say, this stock, and this is not only for this stock, but just the returns. Everything starts with the risk-free rate, and then it just linearly increases. So more in the sense, if beta is 1, then we know the return on the stock is the market return. If beta is 0, yeah, then you're the government. So let's say this is a way to come up with a way to come up with the return for a stock. Capital asset pricing model, it's called.